I never thought a simple dinner could make me feel so small, so painfully invisible. But that night proved me wrong. I walked into their penthouse, heels clicking against the marble floors, and immediately felt the weight of every expensive object in the room pressing down on me. My partner, smiling as if nothing was wrong, guided me toward his friend, the one everyone called flawless, untouchable, the embodiment of wealth and entitlement. She was perched on a velvet sofa, her designer dress immaculately tailored, her gaze sharp and judging, and in that moment, I felt every inch of my modest outfit and trembling hands betray me. He leaned in, whispering that I owed her an apology, that I'd embarrassed him last week at the gallery, and that now I needed to make things right. My voice caught, my lips quivered, but I forced the words out, each syllable a bitter pill I had to swallow in front of her. She smiled faintly, almost predatory, savoring every second of my discomfort, while I felt the invisible line between our lives, rich and opulent versus modest and overlooked, stretch impossibly wide. As I recited my apology, I could feel my dignity slipping away, yet beneath the humiliation, a quiet fire ignited inside me. I might be small in her eyes, but I would find a way to rise. I promised myself then, silently, that I would never let anyone diminish me like this again. As I left the penthouse that night, the words I had forced out of my own mouth replayed in my mind, each one like a fresh sting against my self-respect. I couldn't help but think back to all the times I had bent over backward for people who were supposed to care about me, only to be overlooked, ignored, or quietly ridiculed. My family had always favored someone else, whether it was my older cousin, my partner's ex-girlfriends, or even my partner himself, depending on the day. I remembered working late into the night to plan parties that no one thanked me for, sacrificing weekends to help, and always being the one to apologize when someone felt slighted, even when I had done nothing wrong. There were the subtle digs, too. Jokes about my modest tastes, compliments for others that I never received, and the quiet gaslighting that made me doubt my own memory of events. I realized, painfully, that my entire life had been a series of invisible losses, of giving without acknowledgement, of bending under weight I shouldn't have carried. And yet, despite all of this, I had survived. I had endured every slight, every whispered comparison, every favor given to someone else while my efforts were dismissed. That resilience, that quiet determination, was something no one could see. But I could feel it, burning stronger than any humiliation. And for the first time in years, I started to consider that maybe, just maybe, my patience wasn't weakness at all. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored stationery, embossed with gold lettering that practically screamed wealth I had never known. My heart sank when I realized I was expected to attend this so-called exclusive gathering with her. The friend who had already made me feel small, and my partner, who seemed eager to see me squirm. When we arrived, the lobby alone was enough to make me feel out of place. The chandelier glittered like a constellation frozen in glass, and the marble floors reflected every step, every stumble, every ounce of nervousness I tried to hide. I smiled politely, nodded at the rich and poised attendees, and offered words of admiration I didn't fully feel. Her eyes flicked toward me occasionally, sharp and assessing, and I felt the weight of her judgment like a physical touch. Everything about her screamed effortless opulence, the designer heels that clicked confidently with every step, the perfectly tailored gown, the way she moved through the room as if she owned it, which in her mind she probably did. Meanwhile, I clung to the modest elegance of my outfit, the careful lines and muted colors, trying to appear composed. Every compliment I offered felt like another brick in the invisible wall separating her world from mine. But beneath my polite words, beneath my outward submission, a small seed of resolve took root. I began noticing her cracks, the way she flinched when someone challenged her opinion, how she subtly manipulated conversations to elevate herself, the smugness that might one day be her undoing. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I sensed that this night, which was meant to humiliate me, might also be the starting point for something entirely different. It happened by accident, a slip of the tongue during a conversation that I wasn't meant to hear. The friend, so careful in her presentation, let a single phrase escape. Something about her investments, a backroom deal that was far from as perfect as she made it appear. My heart skipped, and for the first time I saw her not as untouchable, but vulnerable, human, and flawed. I replayed it in my mind, analyzing every word, imagining how it could be used. The unfair advantage she had wielded over me and others didn't have to be permanent. I began picturing scenarios, small at first, subtle nudges that could shift perception in my favor. Each thought tightened the knot of determination in my chest, a mixture of thrill and righteous anger. For years, I had been the invisible one, the polite participant in her performances, and now, finally, I glimpsed a crack in the armor she had worn so smugly. I didn't rush, but I planned meticulously, feeling the intoxicating pulse of possibility. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, and for the first time, the fear of being powerless loosened its grip. Every time I was forced into her presence after that night, her arrogance felt sharper, almost surgical in the way she wielded it. At the charity gala, she laughed at my suggestion for a donation project, whispering to another guest, "Oh, that's cute. She actually thinks she understands philanthropy." I forced a polite smile, my fingers tightening around the wine glass as heat rose to my cheeks. Later, at my partner's birthday brunch, she leaned across the table, eyes narrowing, and said in that condescending drawl, "I can't believe anyone would wear that to a celebration like this. Really, you try so hard, don't you?" My stomach twisted, the words sinking deep, but I kept my tone even, nodding as if I agreed, while a storm brewed silently in my mind. At yet another rooftop soiree, she made a scene by pointing out someone's modest car in the valet line, laughing as the owner's face turned crimson, and when my partner tried to defend me subtly, she cut him off, saying, "Oh, don't worry. She's harmless. It's adorable watching her try." The pattern was relentless, her cruelty wrapped in charm, her words polished to inflict maximum discomfort while maintaining social approval. Each event left me drained, humiliated, but also sharpening my resolve. I began keeping mental notes, cataloging every slight, every weakness, and every opportunity she inadvertently revealed. Anger simmered in me, righteous and controlled, and I realized the more she flaunted her superiority, the more obvious it became that her perfect facade was brittle, that her arrogance could eventually be turned against her. Every laugh at my expense, every whispered insult aimed at someone else, built the foundation for the reckoning I was quietly beginning to orchestrate. I started noticing the people she overlooked, the ones she treated as invisible, and slowly realized they could become my quiet allies. The bartender at the gala who always poured her champagne just a little too slowly, the assistant who nervously scrambled to meet her impossible demands, even the valet who rolled his eyes every time she strutted past. They all saw her for what she truly was. I began planting small seeds of influence, offering smiles, subtle encouragements, or a discreet word here and there that shifted events in my favor. A wrongly delivered invitation at a fundraiser became an opportunity for me to quietly highlight her disorganization. A mispronounced name during her speech gave me the chance to gently correct it, making her flinch before an audience of her peers. Nothing overt, nothing that would immediately reveal my intentions, but enough to start unbalancing her controlled environment. Each small shift gave me a thrill, a taste of agency I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I sensed that my patience and observation could pay off, that the world she thought she ruled with ease had cracks I could exploit. The subtle victories, barely noticeable to others, fed a growing fire of anticipation inside me, and with each maneuver, I began to feel the first stirrings of empowerment, knowing the day of reckoning was inching closer. The night of the gallery opening should have been a celebration, but it quickly became the stage for my worst humiliation yet. As I mingled, offering polite compliments and laughter, she chose that exact moment to single me out. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice dripping sweetness. "I didn't realize someone like you would actually be invited. I suppose it's nice of the host to include all types, isn't it?" Laughter rippled around the room, polite but pointed, and I felt the heat crawl up my neck. My partner's embarrassed glance did nothing to shield me, and I realized that in their eyes, I had truly become invisible, unworthy, and small. Every conversation I tried to start was cut short with a dismissive remark or a subtle eye roll meant only for me to see. The champagne, the glittering lights, the perfectly curated art. All of it seemed to mock my presence. I could feel the stares, the judgment, the quiet comparisons, and a deep ache settled in my chest. And yet, amid the panic and shame, a strange clarity emerged. I saw her arrogance in full view, the way she wielded her wealth and charm like a weapon. And I understood exactly how fragile it all was. In that moment, humiliation became fuel. I clenched my fists beneath my dress, my mind spinning with possibilities, silently vowing that the next time we were in public, the roles would be reversed. That fire, burning with both rage and resolve, marked the turning point. This was no longer just about endurance. It was about justice. Once the humiliation at the gallery settled into my bones, the plotting began in earnest. I stopped reacting and started mapping. I made lists: names, dates, weak links, contractual terms I'd overheard, casual boasts that betrayed more than they intended. I revisited the slip I heard in the penthouse and realized her investments were not the polished empire she portrayed, but a lattice of shaky deals and a few unscrupulous partners. My first move was financial reconnaissance. I requested innocuous favors that felt natural, returning a book to her assistant, offering to help organize a charity list, volunteering for an event committee. Each small request let me observe who answered when she snapped her fingers and who resented the way she treated them. I talked to people without revealing my intentions. I listened more than I spoke. The accountant who managed her foundations complained offhand about delayed invoices. The event planner mixed up dates and looked exhausted, slipping details in ways that made me think the surface shimmer hid a mess. Then I shifted to social leverage. I cultivated relationships with people she dismissed: the caterers, the assistants, the junior partners, even the quiet philanthropist who funded causes anonymously. I bought coffees, asked simple questions, and offered small acts of decency that felt genuine, because the people she hurt deserved kindness. Every remembered preference and favor returned became a quiet network of goodwill that could be called upon. Legal pressure required patience and precision. I combed public records late at night, hunting for filings, liens, and anything that suggested the glossy headlines hid contractual knots. I discovered a discrepancy in a charity registration, an address mismatch that suggested sloppy management rather than malice, but sloppy was enough to unsettle her image. I reached out to a lawyer I had once helped when he was starting his practice. He remembered me and offered to look into the paperwork without charge. Throughout planning, my inner voice alternated between cold calculation and fierce tenderness. I refused to let anger make me reckless. Each step was measured. The right confidant, the right hint at the right lunch, the right question at the right time. I rehearsed conversations, imagining how she would deflect and what she would accuse me of if suspicions turned toward me. I knew the moment would require nerve, an implacable calm that hid everything underneath. Sometimes I worried I was becoming someone who used others as tools. Then I remembered every smirk, every whispered joke, every favor she took for granted. This was not about cruelty. It was about balance. I wanted arrogance to meet consequence, and if that meant exposing brittle bookkeeping and curated fame, so be it. I pictured dominoes falling in slow increments, rather than an immediate collapse. A vendor would mention an overdue invoice in a private message. An assistant would sigh about last-minute cancellations. A tasteful blog would ask how her charity funds were used. Each fragment would seem accidental to outsiders, but deliberate to anyone paying attention. I kept meticulous notes of names, dates, and inconsistencies. I cross-checked filings with social posts of lavish dinners. Timing mattered. Too soon and she could patch the leaks. Too late, momentum waned. I rehearsed calm statements in the mirror, practicing a neutral tone that masked the fire underneath. Some allies feared retaliation. Others wanted assurance. I offered anonymity and delayed publication. Those gestures bought trust. Her reputation was a tower built brick by gilded brick. Remove a few bricks and the structure trembles. By evening, the plan felt cohesive. I was no longer merely reacting. I was directing precise pressure. The first strike would be subtle, nudge that exposed a flaw and forced an answer. My hands trembled when I set the date, but the tremor was anticipation. I sent one terse message to an ally. Tomorrow. Be ready. Then I shut my phone, listened to quiet, and waited for the avalanche I had engineered to begin. The first hints were almost laughably small. An offhand comment in a private chat, a supplier's passive post about delayed payment, a whispered question that reached the right ears. I watched from the edges as her control, which had always seemed absolute, began to wobble in ways that felt inevitable. At a brunch meant to celebrate a new collection, someone I had nudged mentioned an invoice dispute in casual conversation, as if trying to understand, not accuse. A respected blog that often praised her philanthropy published a piece asking questions about accountability, quoting an expert who mentioned administrative lapses. It wasn't a direct attack, but context matters, and context shifted against her. I kept my hands clean publicly. No accusatory posts, no viral messages. Instead, the network I had built murmured in the background, each murmur finding new listeners in private inboxes. An assistant messaged me about sudden cancellations and frantic schedule changes. A caterer I had helped sent a polite note to a journalist about unpaid invoices. These fissures multiplied quietly. At a rooftop gala, she attempted a grand toast to reclaim dominance, but a guest interrupted with a hesitant question about fund allocations. For a heartbeat, she was unsettled. The room's temperature changed. Her charisma, which had smoothed awkward moments before, faltered. On the sidewalk afterward, a vendor I had befriended approached her calmly about a refused payment. She reacted with flustered indignation and began searching for a manager who wasn't there. The exchange was brief but unmediated by PR, and people forwarded the anecdote in private messages. That vendor's quiet dignity contrasted sharply with her practiced theatrics, and I felt a surge of vindication. Rumors spread like spilled wine. People repeated lines they had heard, each retelling sharpening the edges. She began issuing clipped apologies, attempts to contain rather than confront. She hired more assistants and staged tighter appearances, but her smile started to show strain. I watched and logged each reaction, aware of how someone patches a net with too many holes, and how those patches eventually fail. Public blunders surfaced. A photograph from a supposed charity luncheon revealed mismatched dates. An event listed as a fundraiser had no recorded donations. Her PR team offered bland reassurances that invited more questions. Friends who once echoed her talking points switched to neutral replies. The social gravity she had curated began to wobble. I felt a conflicted mix of exhilaration and guilt. My aim wasn't wanton harm, but correction, exposing brittle superiority masquerading as generosity. Still, I couldn't ignore the human cost. Exhausted staff and embarrassed collaborators. Influence ripples unpredictably, and I had urged discretion when I recruited allies to minimize collateral damage. She began searching for scapegoats. When a journalist pressed her, she pointed at a coordinator who stammered apologies, buying temporary time, but costing credibility. Her temper frayed. She snapped at assistants and once muttered something cruel to my partner. Unaware I heard it. Those outbursts eroded the image of control she had relied on. Invitations needed explanations. Sponsors hesitated. A few influential guests stopped RSVPing. Each tiny withdrawal read like a vote of no confidence, and I cataloged them like proof that imbalance could be challenged. I remained careful, offering only neutral observations when asked, letting facts sit like seeds in gossip soil. Messages arrived quietly. "Be careful. We're ready," one ally texted. Another sent a scanned invoice with a terse note. This was never paid. Individually small, these confirmations began to sketch a pattern. At a dinner, she snapped at a partner during an accounting question. His raised eyebrow moved through the table. Guests shifted, uncomfortable, and private whispers followed. Those micro-exchanges mattered because they changed the subject of conversation. Rather than praising her style, people now moved toward questioning competence and care. Each new mention made reporters and sponsors slightly less certain, and uncertainty drained the currency that sustained her influence. Watching her lose control, blind to the hand that had planted the first stones, felt like witnessing a slow, precise unmaking. The first strike had landed. The next would force the facade to fall. I waited. The day of her charity gala arrived like a thunderclap of irony, a night meant to celebrate integrity and empowerment. The irony tasted sweet on my tongue as I stepped out of the cab, the city lights glinting off the massive crystal chandeliers inside the hotel ballroom. Cameras lined the entrance, catching every shimmer of designer fabric and curated smile. She was the star of the evening, wrapped in a gold gown that glittered like false promises. My partner stood beside her, proud and oblivious, the perfect accessory to her grandeur. I felt invisible again, but this time, invisibility was my armor. Inside, everything sparkled: the laughter, the champagne, the shallow compliments. Influencers hovered near her, recording snippets for their stories, hashtags ready. Power and grace. Women who lead. I watched her glide through conversations, collecting admiration as if it were oxygen. But I could already see the cracks, the tightness around her eyes, the way she glanced toward her PR assistant whenever someone mentioned recent rumors. She was dancing on the edge, unaware the floor beneath her had already begun to splinter. I didn't need to do anything dramatic. Truth was already heavy enough to crash through gold. When the MC invited her to the stage to speak, I felt the room hush, every camera focused on her glittering confidence. She began her speech, polished and rehearsed. "We rise by lifting others," she said. My fingers tightened around my clutch, the USB drive inside it pressing against my palm like a heartbeat. Halfway through her monologue, the ballroom screens flickered. At first the guests laughed. Technical issues, someone joked. But then her own face filled the screens. Not the perfect, filtered one. A recording from a private meeting I had discreetly passed to the event tech team through an ally. Her voice echoed through the hall. Sharp, cruel, unfiltered. "I don't care if the money's missing. Just make it look legitimate." People don't read the fine print anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. Her eyes went wide, hands trembling around the mic. Another clip played, her berating a staff member, mocking donors for their cheap attempts at generosity. Gasps rippled through the crowd like waves hitting stone. Even the photographers froze, lenses still aimed at her trembling figure. She tried to speak, to deny, but her own voice kept playing, unraveling the image she'd spent years perfecting. Her PR manager bolted toward the booth, panic painted on her face. My partner turned pale, whispering, "What is this?" But I just stood there, silent, calm, the way she once forced me to stand when she humiliated me. Her attempt at damage control was painful to watch. "These are taken out of context," she said, voice shaking. But the murmurs had already begun. Sponsors exchanging glances, journalists jotting notes, former employees quietly recording the chaos. One woman, the same vendor she once underpaid, stood and said loudly, "Out of context? You never paid us for 3 months." The tension shattered into a storm of whispers and confrontations. Cameras caught every tear, every broken fragment of her performance. She stumbled off stage, mascara streaking down her cheek. I met her eyes briefly, and for the first time she looked small. Not powerful, not untouchable, just another person who thought cruelty was currency. My partner followed her in confusion, torn between loyalty and shock. The crowd was buzzing, outrage, disbelief, satisfaction blending into something electric. Justice wasn't always handed out by judges or headlines. Sometimes it unfolded in real time, right before your eyes, while the guilty tried to hold their crowns together with shaking hands. I didn't stay long enough to watch the full collapse. I stepped outside into the cold air, the hum of the city wrapping around me like applause no one could hear. Behind me, I could still faintly make out the sounds, the raised voices, the panic, the sound of a pedestal finally cracking. I had dreamed of shouting my truth someday, of exposing her cruelty with words sharper than hers. But standing there, I realized silence could scream louder. The world had watched her unmask herself. And that was the purest form of karma. I took a deep breath, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, and whispered to myself, "Now, she knows what humiliation feels like." It didn't take long for her empire to crumble. Within 48 hours, every outlet that had once adored her polished image ran with headlines dissecting her lies. Sponsors withdrew one by one, releasing statements about ethical misalignment. Her name, once gilded across glossy magazines, became a cautionary footnote. I watched the downfall unfold, not with glee, but with the quiet understanding of someone who had seen it coming all along. Her social media went dark first, comments flooded with betrayal and rage. Then the cancellations came, Events, brand deals, partnerships. People she had called friends stopped returning calls. Even my partner, the man who once defended her every whim, sat on our couch staring at his phone in disbelief. "She's ruined," he murmured one evening. There was no anger in his voice, only stunned realization. I felt strangely detached, as if watching justice unfold from behind glass. The same woman who once commanded rooms with laughter now avoided daylight. Paparazzi caught her leaving her apartment in plain clothes, hair unstyled, eyes hollow. The tabloids described her as a fallen star. I saw the pictures and felt no thrill, only finality. The balance had restored itself. At work, people whispered about her. Some pitied, others scorned, but no one defended. I listened, sipped my coffee, and stayed quiet. Power, I realized, had never truly belonged to those who shouted the loudest. It belonged to those who endured quietly, until truth made the noise for them. When my partner finally admitted he'd been wrong, about her, about me, his voice trembled. "You were right all along. I just didn't want to see it." I didn't respond with bitterness. There was no need. Vindication had already spoken louder than any accusation could. I simply said, "We all choose what blinds us," and let the silence between us finish the sentence. A week later, I walked past the same boutique where she had once sneered at my simple dress. The display now featured a going out of business sign. I paused, not to gloat but to remember. This was where I had first learned how cruelty hid behind charm, where her laughter had made me feel smaller. Now I felt nothing but calm. People began reaching out, those who'd once avoided me, now suddenly understanding. I answered with grace, never gloating, never reminding them of their silence when it mattered. There was power in composure, power in restraint. Her last public appearance came through a shaky live stream apology. The same voice that once dripped with superiority now cracked under its own weight. She spoke about mistakes, betrayal, misunderstanding, but everyone could hear the hollowness. It wasn't remorse, just desperation. As I closed the app, I realized how full the air felt, as if years of swallowed words had finally been exhaled. The woman who had forced me to apologize now drowned in the echo of her own. And me, I simply smiled, not in triumph, but in peace. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't loud. It's the quiet, steady dignity of walking away from the ruins someone built for themselves. In the quiet, after everything fell apart, I realized the true confrontation wasn't with her. It was with myself. For years, I'd let other people define my worth, measuring it by their approval, by what I could endure without complaint. I had mistaken endurance for strength. Now, standing in the stillness that followed her downfall, I saw how strength had always been something quieter, the courage to believe I was enough, even when no one else did. There were moments I replayed, her laughter when she made me apologize, my partner's silence, the sting of humiliation burning behind my polite smile. Each memory hurt less now. They no longer felt like open wounds, but healed scars, reminders of battles survived, lessons earned. I understood now that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant reclaiming control over the story that had once defined me. One morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and truly saw the difference. My reflection no longer looked like someone trying to disappear. My eyes were steady, my shoulders unburdened. The fear that had once ruled me, fear of rejection, of being small, of being less than, had turned into something else entirely. Freedom. I started to rebuild in quiet ways. I reached out to people I had avoided during that storm, not to explain, but to reconnect honestly. I accepted opportunities I'd once been too self-conscious to take. I spoke in meetings without waiting for permission, and when I was interrupted, I didn't shrink back. Confidence wasn't loud. It was solid, steady, earned through silence and fire. Occasionally, someone would bring her up, what she'd lost, where she'd gone. I didn't join the gossip. I simply said, I hope she finds peace. And I meant it, not because she deserved it, but because I did. Holding on to anger would have kept me tethered to her shadow. Letting it go felt like stepping into sunlight after years of winter. The night everything ended, I wrote in my journal, "She taught me cruelty. I taught myself grace." That line stayed with me, a quiet mantra I carried into every decision after. I no longer needed to prove my worth through revenge. The balance had already been restored by truth and time. Looking back, I realized her downfall wasn't my victory. My healing was. I didn't rise because she fell. I rose because I finally believed I could. And as I closed that chapter, I promised myself one last thing. Never again would I apologize for my own light just because someone else was afraid of its reflection. Time, as it always does, softened the noise. Weeks passed, then months, and her name stopped trending. The world moved on, hungry for fresher scandals, newer villains. But I still caught fragments of her story now and then. A rumor that she'd moved abroad, a photograph of her at a quiet cafe, wearing plain clothes and no makeup. The same woman who once mocked simplicity now lived within it. Life, in its poetic cruelty, had given her what she once scorned. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate required energy, and I had none left to waste on ghosts. Instead, I carried a calm satisfaction. The kind that didn't show in smiles or posts, but in the steady rhythm of peace after years of turbulence. I had won something deeper than revenge. Self-respect. People who once looked through me now met my eyes differently. Invitations came again, genuine ones this time, and conversations held warmth instead of polite judgment. My career flourished quietly, built on authenticity instead of spectacle. Every time someone said, "You've really come into your own," I thought, "No, I've finally come home to myself." I saw my former partner once, briefly. He looked older, remorse etched into his expression. He asked how I was, and I told him truthfully, better. There was no malice, just closure. Some connections are meant to burn, so that we finally see our own light. Occasionally, at charity events or community dinners, I'd meet people who had once adored her. They'd glance at me with the faint awkwardness of those who once took the wrong side. I didn't remind them. My silence was enough, a quiet echo of every apology I was ever forced to make. That was the final, subtle revenge, to live with grace where others expected bitterness. The city's rhythm went on. New faces, new headlines, new stories of betrayal and redemption. Yet, in the midst of it all, I carried my own quiet ending. A story that didn't need applause to feel complete. Sometimes, when I passed the grand hotels or luxury boutiques that once symbolized everything she used to have, I catch my reflection in the glass. There's no trace of the woman who trembled under someone else's power. Just calm eyes, a knowing smile, and a peace that doesn't need validation. Her world had collapsed in public. Mine had rebuilt in private. And in that contrast, I found the truest kind of justice, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that restores. I walked away not with vengeance in my heart, but with dignity in my steps. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't in her downfall. It was in my rise, silent, steady, and unmistakably my own. It happened quietly, almost unremarkably. No fireworks, no speeches. Just a simple email confirming the transfer. The company she once flaunted as her empire had been quietly sold to a new owner through a chain of intermediaries. Few people knew who stood behind the purchase, but I did. I had spent months working with the right investors, aligning opportunities, connecting dots she never thought I could. Now, her old brand, stripped of its illusions, belonged in part to me. Not publicly, not obviously. My name wasn't on the headlines. I didn't need it to be. Control didn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it wore composure and a well-placed signature. The irony was exquisite. She had built that company on borrowed charm and exploited labor, convinced she was untouchable. Yet here I was, reviewing quarterly reports, approving small decisions that shaped the business she had once used to belittle me. I didn't seek to destroy it, only to reshape it. Under new leadership, it became ethical, quiet, and real. It began to succeed again, honestly this time. Occasionally, I'd receive an update about her. She had tried launching small ventures, but none stuck. Reputation lingers longer than apology. People remembered. Still, I wished her peace. The war was over. One afternoon, I walked past the same hotel where her gala had imploded. The staff greeted me now by name, a small private victory that no one else would notice but me. I smiled, thanked them, and continued on to the black car waiting at the curb. When I slipped inside, the driver asked, "Back to the office, ma'am?" And I nodded. From the window, the city glimmered, full of stories like mine, half hidden behind polished facades. I thought of how far I had come, from forced apologies to quiet ownership, from humiliation to influence. I didn't need to boast. The best revenge stories never ended with shouting. They ended with silence, wealth, and the freedom to choose when and if to speak. As the car pulled away, I whispered to myself, some debts don't need collecting. They just need remembering. And somewhere, in that subtle balance of grace and power, I smiled, knowing that I hadn't just survived her world. I had inherited it.